Welcome to another episode in the podcast series by Helping Crisis 246, where we share tips on what you can do during a mental or emotional crisis and where you can find help. But the podcast is not limited to crisis events, but actually focuses on sharing tips that anyone can use to deal with some of life's most stressful and difficult moments. We focus on coping mechanisms to help you keep away from the edge. Now, I'm Michelle Russell. I'm an attorney, but also a very, very passionate mental health advocate. And if you want to know why I'm so passionate about this topic, you can watch episode 1 where I explain the reason for my passion. And while you're there, check out any of the other episodes. Now, for today's episode, we're actually going to start at what I call is the beginning, and that's the journey to the self, the journey toward the true self, which is the authentic self, versus who we are because the world told us who to be. Have you ever wondered who you'd be if you had the choice? Have you ever wondered who you'd be if you didn't have your roles and responsibilities or religious or cultural beliefs? If you had the freedom to be you, who would you choose? What life would you live? And those are the kinds of things we want to look at in the journey to the self, including healing our wounding, sometimes wounds we don't even know are there, and the value of listening to our bodies. Now, on this journey to self, we're also going to be interviewing certain people who will talk and share with us their healing journey. I'll share a bit of mine, and we can hope that we can support each other on this journey to self, which is perhaps one of the most beautiful and enriching experiences you can have if you let it, or if you let yourself have it. Because it's in the discovery of the self and who you are and what you want that you are able to enhance the quality of your relationships and to essentially do away with the relationships that no longer serve you in the way that you should. Today I have with me Margot Borden. She is an integral psychotherapist, and I'm going to let her tell us what that means. Hi, Margot. Thanks for agreeing to be here with us today.
Hi, Michelle. It's so good to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I've never heard the term integral psychotherapist. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So there's many different schools of like philosophical foundations that are behind the schools of psychology, just as there are many different types of practitioners. But the integral philosophy has an Eastern school of thought from India, which basically looks at the multidimensionality of humans, body, mind, soul, and spirit kind of thing. And the Western school also has its own philosophy that backs it up. So it's looking at human psychology from the inside out and the outside in, rather than just looking at behavior or the analytical capacities of the mind.
What do you mean by from the inside out? How is that different from looking at the analytic capacities of the mind?
Because the mind is actually just it thinks, but it's the thoughts aren't coming from the mind. So the subconscious mind, for example, is closer, expresses itself more closely through the body than in the head, and then the head picks up feelings. Oh, I've got a lump in my throat, or my heart is seizing up. And then it goes into the mind and we can express it. So it's kind of like a halfway house between the outer world, me and the society and others, and the inner world, my emotional intelligence in the body, and then the spiritual dimensions of the self.
So essentially it's like more holistic, so that we don't leave any part out. It's mind, body, heart, soul, spirit connection.
Exactly. When science told us the soul had no place in psychology, new waves of schools came and started saying, well, we're reclaiming the right to have all these dimensions as well. So really addressing, how do we address the whole self?
Okay, so full disclosure, I discovered Margot Borden online through her website. What's the website again?
MargotBorden.com.
Okay, I thought so. And this was sometime last year when I was looking for a therapist. And, I said recently to someone that the kind of therapy or counseling that you might need at one point in your life might not be the same kind you seek out at a later point in your life. And I was looking for someone who could deal with it on a more holistic level so that it wasn't just a bunch of psychological theories or scientific theories, but someone who understood the mind-body connection as well as the soul. And when I went on her website, I really loved the way she described the kind of therapy that she provided. So I reached out and I started some sessions, and I have a look back since. So full disclosure, I do use the services of Margot Borden, and I highly recommend those services. But I brought her here today because I wanted to enter this discussion called what I call the journey to self. And this is like so all encompassing because the journey to self it deals with so many aspects of getting back to the authentic being that you were created as and who you were before society told you what not to be. And so that it can come from healing from parent-child trauma or wounds. It can come after the loss of a very important relationship, such as a breakup, loss of a romantic partner. It can come after loss such as grief. But there are so many ways we find or we start this journey to ourselves. And I really wanted to pick Mario's brain on how do we even begin a journey to the self, and how can we sense if we're being called on this journey.
So as you so rightly said, there's no one way and there's no one timeline that life might give us. We might be suffering and say, oh my God, I have to find a way to, I get out of this suffering. Or we might have a spiritual inkling. Everybody gets called in their own unique way. Some people have had a lifelong of, questioning why. Why did we build society this way? Why do I believe what I do? Who am I? So it could be like real existential questions, or it could be anything that causes distress, emotional distress, fear, anger, and anxiety, all the depression. All of those are signs that the emotions are telling us that something is up. And so we can take those signs. What Western medicine likes to do is label them and say, I'm ill. And what I like to do is say, I'm being called to pay attention to something in myself. Well, there's something in me that needs attention, that needs tending to. And so do we see it as a burden or as a nuisance, or do we see things that happen in our lives, the events and our emotional response, as an opportunity to grow and heal and get to know ourselves better?
I actually really, really love that. You mentioned earlier harmony with the self. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, would you say suffering is caused through disharmony with the self?
Sometimes. I don't think we can ever give a hard and fast answer to anything, but yeah, anxiety is generally caused by estrangement from ourselves. I'm not listening. I'm not tending to myself. I'm focused out there, or I'm in my head. I'm not listening to my body. I don't know how to deal with my emotions, so I'm not working with them, and then they wreak havoc. So it's generally, a sign that we're being called to pay attention to something, and it's an opportunity for healing and psycho-spiritual evolution.
So what modalities do you use in this journey to yourself? And I probably should even ask, what do we call the self? Is it my personality? Like, how do I know who I am or what my self is?
It's up to each person, what it means to them. I like to look at, I have this fun way of playing with the concept of self. Am I aiming to be self-centered, or am I aiming to be centered in the self? So that implies that the self is beyond the ego.
And what is the ego? Because while I might understand that, everyone watching might know what we mean. How do we distinguish self and ego?
In my school of thought, the ego is simply the outer self, the part that helps me navigate in the world and make decisions and be practical, and also can become if we're wounded and we're not addressing our wounds, the ego can become defensive, and we can have defense mechanisms, self-preservation mechanisms, self-sabotage, and we can, when the ego is wounded and we don't tend to it, it tends to get rigid and imprison the soul. So the soul's job is to shine through. And so the real aim of psychotherapy, the journey home, is to work in those wounds that are of the ego. What happened to me? How did I learn to protect myself, so that the ego becomes fluid, so the soul can be at the center of our being, not the ego. So there we go, from ego-centered to centered in the self.
So what happens if I feel out of touch with my soul? I'm hearing you talk about soul, and I'm like, I really just have no clue what she even means. How do I get in touch with? What are the clues? How do I know it's there or it's beckoning? Like,
you could maybe spending time in nature. You'll have a moment where it's just like you just feel connected to yourself. You feel everything is aligned. You feel centered. You feel at peace. There's no ripples or noise or rigidities or, inner conflict going on. You're just, I'm here. So that's a moment when the soul can come shining through. But then there's meditation, there's, listening to guided meditations, videos, breath work. There's no one way to reach the soul. But for me, psychotherapy is the journey to the soul. So it's also a means of getting to the soul. Some people do, dance to get in touch with their spiritual selves, or go and practice ancient rituals, or go to their religious, practices. There's as many ways as there are people on the planet.
When you just mentioned going into nature, it's reminded me of an experience I had back in 2019. And hearing you now, I'm thinking to myself that was the beginning of the journey into my soul. Now, it might have started some time before, but I remember 2019 was a particularly busy year work-wise, and I was perhaps pushing myself more than I should have, pushing my body beyond what it could handle, and kind of just running myself red in the hope that the poor little struggling body would keep up. And I remember there was this particular evening, I went to a farm with a friend of mine. And I don't know why, I just said to him, I want to go with you. And I went. And I was standing at this part in the farm, and there were turkeys and chickens plucking, and the pigs were making all these loud sounds, because I think they do that when they're hungry. That's what he told me. And I was just standing there in this moment, and you could pretty much see the horizon, and you could see the sea. And in that moment, I felt this immense peace and stillness, despite the chickens, the turkeys, and the pigs. And in that moment, I knew this is what I wanted, and this is the direction I wanted my life to go. Yeah. And it was so funny. It's not like I went to the farm that day saying, I want to go find direction for my life. It wasn't any such thing. I just got caught in a moment which channeled me towards the thing my soul was longing for, because I was feeling so much inner turmoil from all I've been doing that year with my life and my body. And in that moment, the feeling I got from being in that on the farm and in nature let me know this is what I needed to feel more whole and more centered. And since then, I've made so many different life decisions that are propelling me toward that ultimate goal. So that what I'm hearing from you is that if we allow ourselves to pay attention to feelings in the moment, the thing that draws you, but the thing that brings you more centered and at peace is the thing that it's beckoning you, come here, come this way.
It can be. There's a little trick in tricky place in what you said, and that is, for example, imagine I have social anxiety because I have poor self-esteem. I was judged as a child. I'm afraid of being judged, and so it's torture for me to go out and be with people. So I get peace being alone. So in that case, I get peace, but is it really peace? Because I'm giving power to my wounds, to my mechanism.
Lots of people think they have no wounds.
Yeah.
How do you address that? I heard a guy say to me the other day, he's like, so you've kind of been through a lot of trauma, haven't you? And I paused because everything in me was ready to say, my youth, all of us. But I said, Michelle, don't start an argument. And I was just like, I just said, yes. But I was hoping he could understand we all have. How do we communicate to people that wounds are more than what we think they are?
Yeah. It's an interesting question, because I think, so what tells me I'm wounded? What tells us we're wounded is, for example, I get super triggered by something. And it's like, wait a minute, if you get a little upset about injustice or, something going on in the world or in your life, but when we get really triggered, generally it's speaking to us of not now. It's something from the past. And so you could say, do you ever get really triggered?
But you're using the word trigger. What does a trigger look like? How do I know I'm triggered?
Emotionally set off. You start shouting, you start bawling, you start shaking, an intense emotional reaction to something.
Out of proportion to the event.
Yeah.
So it probably
means
something going on.
But then again, there will be people who get triggered by, hyper triggered by something, and then say this is normal. So I think if somebody doesn't want to look inside, we really have to respect that. But so, as a therapist, it's different than as a layperson. If somebody comes to me and I clearly see that they're like, nothing's wrong with me, I'm like, oh yeah. And I find, little ways of introducing them to themselves. You can't barge into people, but you can gently invite them. Oh yeah, look at your body language. What's going on there? If it could speak, what would it say? It's like, don't come near me. So there's just little ways, and we learn a lot in our trainings. I've been trained in many techniques over the last. I first started training 36 years ago.
Wow. And what's the purpose of even going inward? What are we trying to achieve?
To meet ourselves.
And why is meeting ourselves even important? Like, many people go through their lives never meeting themselves and seem to live relatively fulfilled lives. Why is this important?
It's not important to everybody, but I think it was Carl Jung who said the unquestioned life is not worth living. It's not a life. And so, at least for me, and it's always been that way, I was born this way, exploring, what is this? Where is this coming from? What's behind it?
What advice would you give to the people who might be feeling some kind of tugging? And they probably can't describe what it is or put words to it, but they've been feeling a tugging. What would you advise them to do at this point?
Okay. So first of all, if there's a tugging there, a lot of people will just, push it down, watch TV, open the phone, have a drink, whatever, to like, I gotta get away from this. But to me, again, I see it as, oh, wow, there's something going on in here. Let's go in and see what it is. And so a very simple technique, and I learned this from Elizabeth Lesser, who is the founder of Omega Institute in the United States and a wonderful writer and an extraordinary human being. You just take your hands and you just put them over your heart, and you just breathe, and you feel your heart without trying to get anywhere, without trying to understand anything, and you just let yourself feel. And you can let yourself feel that pull or that tension, and just hold space for it and meet it. Hello, welcome. And what happens then is it generally releases and we come back to our center. So, and when we resist it, it's a lifetime of just trying to keep it down, trying to keep away from it. And What we resist controls us, you know, old patterns, wounds, mechanisms, beliefs that are, you know, out of sync with the soul control us until we address them.
I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Thank you so much for sharing with us today on such a spiritual and soulful level and looking at psychology from a different angle. You know, it was more from the healing and holistic angle,
Yeah.
rather than perhaps the bookwork that we kind of used to hearing. This was a beautiful experience. Margot, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It was a real pleasure to share this with you and to connect.